are us. It's kind of their angle on things. So
this Jeff Sessions character,
we'll see how it goes. I'm not too worried because I think there's going to be so much pushback on this.
Yeah, and that's the other thing about Trump. He seems to be a populist, and if there is too much pushback from that direction, I think he's going to try to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah.
When they did a recent survey of the United States of how many people think that marijuana should be legal, like recreationally legal, it's in the 60% now, which is for the first time ever.
Yeah, and states have done it, and I just don't think you can, you can't go back to the war on drugs. I mean, it was a miserable failure when it happened. There's, over 40 years, they pounded over $1 trillion down this rat hole. There are more drugs, more kinds of drugs, easier to get, cheaper than ever, so where's the success? And more people in prison as a result of this, so where's the success of the war on drugs?
There's nothing. There's nothing they can point to. It's not like anyone was saved. There's not like...
The problem is that these people, facts don't carry much weight with them. I mean, they're kind of off in their own private ideological fantasies, and the fact that the war on drugs doesn't work doesn't matter to them. It's like, these are bad people who need to be punished. That's their stance on it. It's not about anything other than that.
Yeah, I think that's really important when you just said these are bad people. I mean, they're really talking in simplistic terms. That's one thing that Sessions said, that marijuana is not something that good people use, which is just preposterous. How many grandmas are out there that are listening to this going, what the fuck is this guy talking about? This is crazy.
Well, yeah, it is. And it's clear that, not a jot of reflection or careful thought goes into these kinds of statements. This is what bothers me. I mean, many, many things bother me about Trump. One of the chief things, one of the major, I guess you could say, flaws in his character, among many. But you listen to him talk, you listen to his general thing, and you realize this is not a man who's ever had a reflective thought in his life. There is no there. There is no inner self. People say, well, just give that man some ayahuasca and that will straighten him out. I don't think so. I think there's, there has to be something inside to straighten out.
Don't you think that maybe, I would like to speak to him alone and find out who he really is. I mean, you think when someone's speaking in front of, a big group of press or, anytime there's a camera on them, it's really hard to figure out who that person is.
Yes, that's
true. I think being alone with someone would be very illuminating.
I agree. Maybe alone he's different, but he is such a creature of media and television.
Yeah,
It's
inexorable, right?
Yeah, so maybe there is a thoughtful person there, but you sure don't see any evidence of that. And that's unfortunate. I mean, because that's, whatever you can say about Obama, and there's many bad things that, he was not a perfect president. He was very thoughtful. And smart, I'm not so sure Trump is smart. I mean, he's smart in a certain way, but not the way that we need our leaders to be smart, in this age. We need to, anyway, we can go on all day about this, and that's not really what we want to talk about.
Yeah, we could go on about this all day, and let's definitely not. Let's shift gears and talk about this celebration of 50 years of psychedelic research. And what you're doing now it's in Birmingham, is that where it is?
It's in Buckinghamshire. It's in England.
I knew it was a B.
Yeah.
One of those places.
It's not, this is something that I've wanted to do for a long time. And the backstory is that in 1967, there was a conference that was sponsored, believe it or not, by the Health, Education, and Welfare, Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, National Institute of Mental Health. U.S. government paid for this symposium held in San Francisco in 1967 called the Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs. And all the biggies were there. Shulgin was there, Andrew Weil was there, Schultes, of course, he was probably the one that, more or less around whom it coalesced. But this was a chance for interdisciplinary people to come together in a private conference and share knowledge, and that was done. And they published this symposium volume called Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs, which was the U.S. Public Health Service publication. You could get it from the U.S. government printing office for a long time. And, but originally the idea was that about every 10 years or so, they'd have follow-up conferences, right? Well, 67, the war on drugs came along. The government became embarrassed that they had anything to do with this, and there was never any follow-up conference, right? So though that book that came out was very influential to me. It was one of the big influences of my life as a 16-year-old when I was just getting interested in psychedelics. So for many years, I've wanted to do a follow-up conference. I wanted to do it on the 30th anniversary back in '97, but it never came together to do that. So this is the 50th anniversary. It's now or never. And so it's now, apparently. We are going to do this thing. And it's going to be kind of much in the spirit of the original conference. We're not going to keep it completely closed, because we're not that kind of people. There's not a lot of room for people to actually come to the place it's going to be, which is this place called Tyringham Hall. It looks exactly like Downton Abbey. I mean, it's an English country house, beautiful place, but not a place set up for a huge conference. There'll be maybe 10 guests staying there and a bunch of people staying close by. But the point is not so much the people attending. It's going to be live streamed on Facebook, which anyone can tune into that. And then we're going to publish the symposium volume for 2017. That everyone who presents is going to submit a full paper. We're going to publish that as volume 2. We'll bring them out together as a deluxe edition. The first one, which is available for free, it's in the public domain. And then the one from this conference, and we'll package them together as a collector's edition. And we're pre-selling that now as part of the strategy for getting the money to pay for this thing. And we're doing okay, So I give you the website. It's espd50.com.
What's it stand for?
Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs 50th anniversary.com, and then there's also a Facebook page where the live streaming is going to be. So if you go there, you can order the book, you can get the whole backstory, you can sign up for the Facebook live stream and so on. And that's what we're going to do. And I've been very lucky. Some people, how these conferences are, you don't do it on your own. When I sort of floated this idea, a lot of people stepped up and said, yeah, I want to be involved, I'll be involved. Not only people that are helping organizing it, but also people that are providing some funding. So now we have the money to pay people, bring them from all over the world. There'll be about 18 presenters. And some really good people, some very high-profile people. David Nichols will be there. Mark Plotkin, who runs the Amazon Conservation Team. A number of, those are maybe the two highest profile, but people that are known in the field. And there's, you can look at the website, espd.com. You can look at the program, and if it appeals to you, get on the live stream. So that, those technologies did not exist in 1967, right? So they do now, so why not let the world in? We can't have everybody come to Buckinghamshire, but we can have them all over the world, so that's the idea.
Well, I'm sure the response to this is going to be tremendous if you can live stream it, and live streaming it on Facebook is going to be huge. And that's a great idea.
Well, I hope so.
Oh, it is, for sure. It's an awesome use of the technology, because there really isn't something like that people can tune into and watch 18 different people speak.
And of course, it'll all be documented, right? So it'll be archived. We'll generate a DVD out of it. But mainly it's the books. I mean, the idea of actually collecting real physical books might seem like a quaint 20th century idea to people, and it is.
We
But
have to do it while we still can.
Yeah, I like the idea of having a nice box set.
Yeah.
But people don't have to get that. They can get the single one. They don't have to do anything, but I tell them. But if they're interested, they can do it. And so, thanks for letting me come on and let people know about this and tweeting it and so on. This is all very helpful, and it looks like there's going to be a lot of response. And then, of course, the Psychedelic Science Conference is coming up, and we have the symposium guys, PSY. They're running the stage at the MAPS conference, the stage in the marketplace. So I'm going to be on there, and they're collaborating with us on this project. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Now, how do you organize the 18 different people that are talking and the subjects so there's no overlap, and so that the message it stays vibrant?
Well, it hasn't really been a problem. I mean, for one thing, I pretty much knew who I wanted to come, and I know what their specialty is, so I invited these people, and they cover a variety of specialties. So not really too much duplication. Everyone brings something unique, their own perspective, so it's pretty easy, really. I mean, the idea of the ethnopharmacologic search for psychoactive drugs is that, we wanted to focus on the frontier of this. This is still a very active area. We don't want, not another conference about ayahuasca, and that's all wonderful, and I'm totally behind it. And in fact, truth in advertising, we got 4 talks on ayahuasca, but different aspects of ayahuasca that haven't really been discussed so much at conferences. And then we do have one gentleman talking about crown, and a specialist ethnopharmacologist talking about that. We have Ken Alper, who is maybe the world's recognized authority on iboga and ibogaine, and from the pharmacology, chemical, clinical side. We've got him, we've got Dave Nichols, we have another person, another phytochemist talking about Salvia divinorum. So these are things that were not even on the radar, in 1967, and that's kind of the idea, that there's been 50 years more work, and a lot of work, and never any follow-up conferences. So that's the excuse for doing this. This will be the follow-up conference, and if it gets momentum, then maybe we'll be able to do number 3 and number 4. Well, probably by the time number 4 comes around, I'll be drooling in my oatmeal, so I may not have much to do with that one.
Oh, I think there's going to be some new science that's going to kick you right back into gear.
Well, let's hope so.
There's a lot going on right now.
I'm holding on for it.
I think you're catching the wave right at the right time, Dennis.
Right. Sometimes I wonder, but
yeah, I'm super positive for you. What's the status of Salvia divinorum? What is the legal status?
Salvia divinorum is more or less legal on the federal level. It's still sold. I think a few states have banned it. I'm not sure which states.
How funny that it's the opposite way. Most things are federally illegal, and then the states legalize them, like marijuana at least. But salvia is, for people who don't know, super potent psychedelic.
Super potent and super bizarre.
Yeah, very weird.
And I think maybe that's kind of the built-in protection against abuse, because a lot of people don't care for it. It's like once is enough, never again. Many people. I mean, this is not something that you're likely to get addicted to, unless you're just a very peculiar person, because it's dysphoric, it's not pleasant. Most people find it quite unpleasant, even terrifying.
Well, years back,
but I think one of the things that protects against it, people smoke it, which is not the traditional way at all. But again, it's like, it
What
only
is the
lasts a
traditional
few
wine?
minutes. The traditional wine is you chew the fresh leaves.
And it's the sage, it's some variation of the sage plant, correct?
It is a sage or a mint. It's in the mint family, and yeah, it's called a sage, but it's really a mint.
I always wondered if there was some sort of correlation between the name sage, meaning wisdom, and then this stuff.
No.
Just total bum luck.
Some would like you to think so.
Yeah.
I think Daniel Siebert, who's one of the specialists, he has a website called sagewisdom.org or .com. And good stuff. He's into kratom. He provides, salvia. He provides good information on it there. Most people, at least my own experience, and many people, it's like, well, it's interesting. It's profoundly strange. And what do you bring back from it? That's the
Right.
question. What do you bring back from it? I think that's partly why, most people they don't seek it out particularly.
My friend
But
Ari
then I
took
know
it.
people that do like it. So.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that do.
Yeah.
I only did it once, and I had this very bizarre out-of-body experience, but I don't think I took enough. I had a friend, Ari, who took a lot, who over the course of 10 minutes lived maybe, he believes, in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 months in this dimension where he had a life, and he had friends, and he had a job, and relationships, and he went through this and came back, and 10 minutes later he's like, this is going to be impossible to describe, but I lived a life. I had like this alternative reality that I went through for multiple months.
Those kinds of experiences, believe it or not, are not that uncommon on salvia. Somebody told me once they had the experience where, they were in a place, they were like 7 or 8 years old. It was Christmas morning. They were at the Christmas tree celebrating Christmas, opening the presents with a family that this guy had no connection to and had never seen. And like, what do you make of that? I mean, I think salvia is interesting in that regard, in that, some of these ones that, they're worth exploring, right? I mean, if you can distort time or actually go into, parallel dimensions or whatever, that's looking into.
Yeah.
I think it takes more intrepid psychonauts than I am to look into that, but I would encourage people to carefully explore this,
Years ago, when I first explored DMT, you could get 5-MeO DMT online.
Mm-hmm.
There was a chemical company, you could buy it, and I bought like a jug of it, like a container of it, like the size of this stevia container, which is, for people who don't know, enough to get high for the rest of your life. You can do DMT once a month for the rest of your, and that's all you want to do, by the way, especially 5-MeO.
Right.
5-MeO brings you to some place that feels like the ultimate center of the universe, and there's nothing, and you're a part of the whole. It's also no visuals, which is really weird. Or if it is a visuals, it's like these opaque geometric patterns that exist in this bizarre white, and you just cease to exist, and it feels terrifying and strange and.
Again, there's no accounting for taste. I mean, I agree. It is like that. There are no visuals, so that's something strange about it. But many people feel like if it puts you in this void place or the zero energy point. I don't know if you've had James Orrock on here.
No.
He wrote the book Tryptamine Palace.
No.
Which is all about 5-methoxy-DMT.
How do you spell his last name?
Orrock, O-R-O-C-K, I think. The name of his book is Tryptamine Palace. And his thing is 5-methoxy, and
That's his thing, huh?
yeah. And now, and it's an interesting book. And now the Sonoran toad, right?
Yeah.
That's 5-methoxy, basically.
And so that toad, you excrete something on like glass.
You excrete the venom. You actually have to torture the toad a little bit, or squeeze the venom, which is in the parotid glands. You squeeze it out on a slide, dry it out, and then you can smoke it. And it's about 11 to 15% 5-MeO, but
Wow.
it's a heavy hit.
Do they know why this toad produces this in venom? I mean, is it psychoactive when you eat it?
Well, who knows? Yeah, who knows? Most toads produce bufotenine, right?
Right.
Which is very close to 5-methoxy. And in fact, it's named after the toads. The genus of toads is bufo, right?
Right.
Bufotenine is found in most of these toads, but Bufo alvarius is the only species known that contains 5-methoxy DMT. So it's got this there's a probably single gene mutation that lets it produce this methoxylated compound, which is much stronger than bufotenine. And by the way, just to caution people, sometimes in the media you hear about people are licking toads.
That's not going to do it.
No, they're not licking toads. They're smoking toads. And,
Yeah, isn't that weird that it just gets
and
distorted?
don't lick them because
Yeah.
there are nasty things in there that will kill you if you lick it. They're
Really?
pyrolyzed. Yeah, these cardiac glycosides.
Oh, God.
But pyrolyzing it, burning it, destroys all those things. So that it's okay to smoke it, but it's definitely dangerous to lick it. Most people don't like licking toads anyway.
It's probably, yeah, who came up with that?
Right. I think various fairy tales, right? Isn't that the...
Does the human body produce 5-MeO DMT as well?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And is it produced in the same areas like the liver and the lungs and presumably the
Presumably the pineal gland,
Yeah.
all of these things, yes, it does. There's a lot of controversy about whether, these endogenous tryptamines, DMT primarily, but 5-MeO is definitely there as well. Do they have a function? There is a lot of speculation and not a lot of facts about whether they actually have a function. I mean, they're made, and there's one school of thought that says, they're sort of like physiological noise. They'll never reach a point where you could actually perceive any effect because the enzymes, any kind of cellular enzyme will just chop up DMT very readily. It's so close to human metabolism. It's gonna be very ephemeral in the system, even if it is released. But other people maintain that under some circumstances, the DMT can be stored in vesicles and neural vesicles and released on demand, or when some stimulus leads to its release, like some stress of some sort.
Jamie, go out and grab that painting that young guy sent. The guy who has a pineal gland tumor, who makes this really crazy tryptamine art. This
Yes,
guy,
I've heard about
this guy. This guy
Mhm.
sent me one of his pieces.
Yeah.
And he has a tumor. Do you know his name, Jamie? We'll find his name. And I'll give this guy some love. But you look at his artwork and you go, oh yeah, that's what that is. Almost like Alex Gray stuff, but Alex Gray stuff is it's art. I mean, it's definitely representative of the tryptamine world. It's beautiful, it's fantastic and amazing.
Right.
But it's art.
Right.
This guy's stuff seems like a trip. Like it's the chaos of the tryptamine experience is sort of replicated in his artwork. Yeah, that's it. And so this young guy, we'll find out his name. He sent this.
I first heard of this gentleman from,
Thank you.
holy moly.
Take a look at this.
Yeah, I first heard of this guy from John Ohia, who organizes Alex's
I don't know which
events.
way's up.
I don't think there is an up, Joe. I think this is a zero gravity environment. Up is
Yeah.
any way that you want it to be. This is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, well, I'm waiting for we're building a new studio, and when that's done, we'll have this up prominently featured, but this kid's work is just incredible. James, see if you can find it, who he is, but
He should be, is he
I hope he's healthy.
letting himself be looked at by medical people?
I think he's just happy to be tripping all the time.
He's just gonna leave it alone. What about science?
Sean
man?
Thornton.
Sean Thornton?
Yeah, I got a
Shout out to Sean Thornton. Yeah, there's his work. There it is. Artist got cancer of the pineal gland. His paintings will leave you speechless. Yes, they will. Yes, they will. Sean Thornton. Amazing. Yeah. His stuff is incredible. And apparently, well, he's in at least in some sort of way anecdotal evidence that it's produced in the pineal gland. Of course, the Cottonwood Research Foundation that Dr. Rick Strassman is part of, in his amazing work from DMT to Spirit Molecule, of course, the documentary that you and I were in.
Right.
His work has shown that it is produced by the pineal gland in live rats.
Mm-hmm.
So we know now for a fact that at least in that mammal, it's produced in the pineal gland. But that's always been for people that I went to the Vatican last summer, and one of the really cool things was the giant pine cone that they have in the center of like one of the outer areas.
Yeah.
And I was really lucky to have a very good guide who was a professor, and he was explaining to me that was representative of the pineal gland. And yeah,
wow,
it was really fascinating because there's this enormous pine cone, and it's surrounded by these two peacocks, or two peacocks on the side. They're supposed to represent immortality in some sort of strange way. So I don't know what that whole vision was supposed to mean, but he was very adamant that pine cone, there you see it up there on the screen, that is representative of the pineal gland, and also in ancient Egypt and a lot of the hieroglyphs you see that as well.
Right, right. Well, yeah, pineal itself means because it is shaped like a pine cone, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's named that. But I had no idea. That is very interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
What it was also fascinating was this guy, although he knew that was representative of the pineal gland, he did not know that the pineal gland produced DMT. He wasn't even aware of what DMT was.
Right.
So he and I had this really cool conversation about it, where he was like, "What? With this crazy Italian accent, this is amazing." And he's writing things down, and I'm, he's telling him about Strassman's work and you and your brother and all these different things to look into, and
right. There is a.
While my wife was rolling her eyes, like, "Oh Jesus, not this shit again."
You just can't be taken out in public, Joe. You always embarrass me.
Well, she knew as soon as the guy said pineal gland, and my eyes lit up, and I'm like, "Here we go. Let's talk about drugs."
Right. Well, there is a guy, a couple of interesting people to mention in this context. One of them is a researcher, a guy named E.D. Frexka.
How do you spell that?
Good question. E.D. F-R-E-C-K-S-K-A, I think. I may have to correct myself on that. He's a pharmacologist and neurochemist and psychiatrist, but he is the one that's really kind of leading the charge for endogenous functions of DMT, and has good evidence, which has been, disputed by some. I mean, Dave Nichols is kind of on the other side of it. He's like, DMT doesn't have any internal function, all these people are deluded,
That seems to me to be really cocky.
Well, I think that it's surprising that Dave, who's a very careful scientist, would have such pre-formed ideas.
Very rigid ideas.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a conference in the UK at the end of June called Breaking Convention, which you may have heard of. It's like a psychedelic conference. Dave and ED are going to be there. I'm going to be there, hopefully keeping them up. I don't want any fist fights. They're going to be talking about this and doing a debate on it. Breaking Convention, you might tell people to Google that. That's a very interesting conference.
For sure. What makes Dave so confident? I mean, when you consider the potency of it, and the knowledge that's produced in the body, and then also the knowledge of the effects of it, which are just astounding.
Right.
How can anyone say that you know for sure? Has he done it? Has Dave done it?
Of course he's done it.
So how the fuck can he do it and not go, okay, what is this?
Well, I think he does, but then there's also this very reductionist side to him, and he basically, just as a pharmacologist, he says it's never going to reach, sufficient concentration in the plasma to have an effect. However, I think he's wrong. And I told him, I was teasing him, I was saying, I wrote back, that famous phrase Arthur C. Clarke once said, when a distinguished but elderly scientist says that something is possible, he's very likely correct. when he says it's impossible, he's almost certainly wrong.
Well, it's, when you're talking about the just general biodiversity of human beings and how some people, well, let's talk about other human neurochemistry, like depression. Like some people are super happy and have no problem with their dopamine or serotonin levels.
Right.
And there's other people that have like real issues.
Yeah,
Well,
there is that.
Right,
There
so
is
if you
that.
just look at that, the
Yeah.
variability of that, and then also how that can be manipulated with exercise and all these other different things that can raise those levels up. What about the other thing, like in terms of like holotropic breathing or all these different shamanic breathing and yogic exercises, Kundalini yoga, which
Right.
I haven't experienced in Kundalini yoga, but I did have a very bizarre experience fairly recently on yoga where I went into class on a pretty high dose of cannabis, and I started tripping in the middle of one of the more intense poses. It was just something akin to the very beginnings of a DMT trip, where I started seeing patterns and seeing things moving and some sort of it didn't go anywhere, but
Right.
I don't pursue it in terms of like attempting to make that happen.
Right.
But I would imagine that if it's made in the body, and then the effects of it are reproducible when you take it. I mean, taking DMT, there's a very few people, there's a very small percentage that don't have an experience when they take it, right?
Very small percentage. Yeah.
Do we know what that number is? Is it
Probably something like, I mean, I would say a wild guess, but a 2% or something.
So that's actually
Which is,
pretty high.
again, anomalous. Why
Yeah.
should there be people who don't
right?
have any effect? I mean, that's a whole other question about what's strange about their metabolism. But it's interesting that you raise this because a lot of these yogic techniques, especially Kundalini, is probably about inducing DMT synthesis in the pineal or wherever it occurs. There's also a very interesting technology that has come to light. I just found out about it last summer, called the Ajna light. Have you heard of this?
No.
AJNA. So write down ajnalight.com. This guy who's developed this is a very interesting fellow. He's named Guy Harriman, and he used to work for Apple. He actually worked very closely with Steve Jobs when Steve Jobs had Next Computing. So he's basically a computer programmer and engineer. Worked with Steve Jobs, but then for some reason, he decided he had to move to Thailand and become a Zen monk, which he did. But he continued to work with technology, and he developed this thing called the Ajna light, which he claims induces DMT synthesis in the pineal. And I was at a conference last summer, actually at Tyringham, at this place where this one is going to be, and he was there. I tried it a couple of times, and by golly, it's a lot like DMT.
Really?
Yeah.
So explain it. What is it?
Well, it's just it looks like a floor lamp. It's nothing. It's got this array of LEDs on a holder. You lie under it, and they're just white LEDs, and he programs it from his iPad, I guess, in different sequences. But you lie under this thing for a few minutes, and pretty soon you get into the zone. These visuals begin to manifest, and it looks a great deal like DMT. So then, and he claims, it's synthesizing DMT in the pineal, and it is very much like DMT would be if it's released at the site of action, because DMT, when you smoke it brings a big body load with
Do you have to wear that goofy outfit? What's with the orange outfit? Seriously.
What is it?
Well, they're in Thailand.
I understand, but the expression of monkness,
Yeah.
the pious outfit, let it go, folks. Just wear a t-shirt.
Right, wear whatever. I
would
didn't,
just think the
I
Lord-
didn't have to get into into the costume to do it, but I did do it a couple times.
How many times did you do it?
Well, I was not there long enough to do. I did it a couple times.
And this woman's sitting. Is it just effective sitting as it is lying down?
I couldn't tell you, but I expect so.
You lie down
I lay down, yeah.
and you close your eyes and
No, you close your eyes. Doesn't matter because it's
Coming through
You
the
don't
light.
have eye shades on.
right.
And usually he's playing some music. but then, in me, like the reductionist, kicks in and says, well, Guy, this is interesting. How do you know it's really DMT
Right.
that you're stimulating? And we've been going back and forth on that, and how can you test that? And there are ways to do it, but most of them involve some fairly drastic procedures, like you can do that you wouldn't want to do on people because they wouldn't give you permission if they had any sense. But you could do it to rats. You could do something called microdialysis. You can put essentially a microscopic tube that's absorbed next to the pineal, and you can collect samples that you can detect. This is not something that people would volunteer for.
How would you take your word for it?
Well, I just want to know, does it really induce it or not? I'm not saying it does, but it's a lot like DMT.
What about hovering something like that over a sensory deprivation tank, like being inside of it and having it hover over your head, so you have the added experience of out of body with that? I mean, I would think that'd be pretty intense and not hard to recreate.
Probably not. What you'd probably want to do with that is to have some kind of goggles, essentially, that could be connected to his program by Bluetooth or something. Mm-hmm. So then you're wearing the goggles, you're in the isolation tank.
But if you just hover it over your head, if you just have an arm, like a computer monitor arm, and just swing it over the head, and so you turn it on, close the door of the tank, close your eyes, lay back, and maybe it has like a 30-second window where it lets you settle in, and then begins the program.
Lots of ways you could approach it.
That just seems to me to really ramp it up. Now, here's the question.
It's interesting, though. This is just one of an array of, what you might call neurotechnologies, or even spiritual technologies. Maybe this will make psychedelics obsolete.
Well, this is a great way that you could do it without actually having to hold on to an illegal drug.
Exactly. Because you're carrying your illegal drug with you, right? So far, they can't arrest you for that, although I'm sure they're trying to figure out a way.
That was your brother's classic line, everyone's holding.
Everyone's holding, that's right.
Now, with this stuff, did you experience the communication that you get with DMT? Because that, to me, has always been the most profound aspect of it, is this feeling that I'm in the presence of something, and then this sort of telekinetic, understanding the words but not hearing the words.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I didn't get that because I think I was not under long enough. I didn't have much time, so I was only under, each time I was under maybe 20 minutes, which isn't, I think if I stayed in that place, if I could settle into it for an hour, I think that probably would manifest, And
you think this? Why? Why do you think this? Why do you think it would change?
I think it takes a while for the thing to fully, whatever the term is, if it is DMT, for the DMT to reach a critical level where you're seeing that kind of stuff.
Do you feel this because it was ramping up during your experience?
I felt like it was, but if I had stuck around, I thought it would. I thought it would develop. And we've talked about, thinking about how to establish that this really is DMT. Another approach that we've tried is to take or the guys tried, I don't have access to the light, I can't afford it, but guys have tried, it costs about $3,300, which is not bad, but beyond my pay grade right now.
I'm going to buy it for you for a present. How about
you
that?
should buy it and keep it yourself.
I'm going to buy two of them. I'll buy one for you and one for me. We'll correspond.
All right.
All right.
Well,
now
besides you're going to do that, I might mention that that guy is offering a conference special here. If you
do I have to wear the outfit?
Yeah, no, you don't. But if you buy
orange.
it, you'll get a discount on it if you go through the Facebook site, which I'm about to put his stuff
Okay,
up there.
beautiful.
We can talk about this offline, but if you go through Facebook, some portion of it will go toward supporting this conference.
Well, I would love that. I'm very curious about this because I know that I have a good buddy of mine, my friend Danny, who's done Kundalini for quite a long time, and he can reproduce DMT states. He's actually had DMT experiences independently of the Kundalini, and he says it's the same thing. He says he can get there, and I believe him. I'm just too lazy or something. I don't know what it is. I'm not inclined.
Well, I think there's a genetic component, you know? I mean, like this gentleman, although he has a tumor, I'm not sure why. I mean, he doesn't want medical people poking and prodding him, but he would be a perfect subject to settle a lot of issues if he was willing to, you know, cooperate. I mean, just having a look at his cerebral spinal fluid, which would be the obvious, you know, fluid to sample for this, would be very interesting.
Yeah, but I can understand his reluctance if he has reluctance. Yeah, people drill into your dome, trying to suck out brain juice. It doesn't sound fun. But it is interesting, though, that these compounds are, in some way, a part of normal human neurochemistry. And why, right? And Dave Nichols, what does he believe?
Well, I don't know if he believes anything. He just, you know, he just is skeptical that in normal physiological processes, DMT has much of a function.
What about dreams?
Dreams are a possibility.
Yeah, that's always been the big one, right?
That's always been the big one. And it's totally plausible. You'll have to get him on here and let him explain himself.
I would love to.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not sure. He just has this idea that, I think for one thing, you know, he's kind of a reductionist guy. I think all the new age stuff, the new excitement about DMT, the pineal and all that, it kind of puts him off. But on the other hand, don't assume that we know everything, because in fact we know nothing, you know, and if it's there, I think it probably does have a function, you know. It's not surprising that it's there, it's everywhere. I mean, DMT is an interesting molecule because it's 2 steps from tryptophan, right? Tryptophan is an amino acid, an essential amino acid, one of the 20 that goes into proteins. So tryptophan is in every living thing on this planet, and there are 2 enzymes that are also pretty much universal in cells that can convert DMT or tryptophan to DMT in 2 simple steps. You know, I don't want to get too into the chemistry, but basically you remove the acid portion of the amino acid, you get tryptamine, and from there you add the methyl groups, and there you are, you know, which is why DMT is, you know, very, very common in plants, for example, and animals. I mean, I tell people nature is drenched in DMT.
Drenched is a great word.
Drenched in DMT. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of species of plants that contain DMT, for sure. You know, I mean, there hasn't been any survey or anything like that, but if you look at the genera that have a lot of DMT, like acacia is a good example. The Australian acacias are some of the strongest sources of DMT. There are 1,700 species of acacia. Probably 75% of them contain DMT.
And I'm sure you're aware of the Israeli scientists that believe that the story of Moses rather, and the burning bush was the acacia tree. And they think that was the confusion of all the translations and of course the oral history passed down over many, many years, then finally written down. But this idea of the burning bush delivering the word of God was most likely in some way a psychedelic trip induced by DMT, and most likely because of the acacia tree.
Most likely the acacia tree, because that was in the area. You know, I mean, it's an interesting idea, and it's interesting that you know, sort of the way that the burning bush presented itself was like DMT presents itself. You cannot take your eyes away from it, but at the same time you cannot look at it.
Right.
But pharmacologically, was this something he smoked? Was it in incense? How was he exposed to this? And you know, because that will make a difference, because you can't eat DMT because it's destroyed by monoamine oxidase, right? That's the whole basis of ayahuasca. In terms of these acacias, you know, the question comes up also, well, okay, most of them are native to Australia, so did the Aborigines know about this? And if you look at their art, looks like DMT. It's very psychedelic art.
I haven't really looked at very much much
all of
original.
these pointillist kind of designs in Aboriginal art. I mean, they're extremely psychedelic.
Super fast with that.
But the Aborigines, I think they had to know about it. They're just not talking about it. But one possible way that they could have used it, because the DMT in the acacias is so high, the leaves, some of these acacias, they're 2% DMT.
Wow.
So if you were to take leaves and throw them on a fire in a enclosed space, like a sweat lodge type space, you could potentially get quite loaded on DMT. There's no indication that they smoked stuff, but they may have fumigated themselves, with DMT.
Oh, that completely makes sense if you're talking about a burning bush.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, exactly. And
How does that make its way to Israel, though?
Well, maybe this.
Who knows? Who knows? Or anything makes its way anywhere.
I mean,
right?
these folk technologies. It's interesting if you look at the New World. In the historical sense, people have remarked, why are there so many more psychedelic plants in the New World than the Old World? Right? It's something about people's relationship to plants in this very high biodiversity environment. People are mucking around with plants, right? Like a perpetual question that comes up is, how did they figure out how to combine Banisteriopsis and Psychotria to get the activity of ayahuasca? How out of 80,000 species in the Amazon did they figure out
If you could explain
these two?
to the uninitiated why that's important with the monoamine oxides.
Yeah, well, it's important because Banisteriopsis contains these alkaloids called beta-carbolines that are monoamine oxidase inhibitors, and monoamine oxidase is the enzyme in the gut that breaks down DMT. So you can drink tea with DMT in it, you can eat it all day, nothing's going to happen, because this enzyme will inactivate it, and that's probably a reflection of an evolutionary process. We've adapted to toxins in our environment, basically, but if you inhibit that with the alkaloids from the Banisteriopsis, they're very potent, very selective MAO inhibitors that protects it from degradation in the gut. It can cross into the blood and into the blood-brain barrier. So that's the basis of the oral activity. And people make much about how they sort of stumbled on this combination, right? And in fact, one of our presenters at this conference, Manuel Torres, is an archaeologist, has been looking at this for quite a while. And this is, this is one of the sort of gee whiz things. How did these primitive people figure out how to combine these plants, right? I agree, it's remarkable. If you talk to the shaman, they'll say, well, the plants told us.
Right.
But what does that mean, But what is interesting to me, in a way, and what I've been thinking about lately, if you look at the archaeology of these things, the snuffs that, there are 2 or 3 different kinds of snuffs that are used in South America that contain DMT. The Anadenanthera snuffs and the Varrola snuffs. The Anadenanthera snuffs are ancient. We have archaeological evidence that puts that back to 10, 11,000 years. They are by far the most ancient psychedelics used in the New World are these snuffs that contain DMT. Nobody is asking the question, what possessed these people to take the seeds, grind them up, and shove them up their nose? I mean, this is not something that intuitively you would do, and yet that seems to me as easily as puzzling as how did they find the combination for ayahuasca. Nobody's really addressed that. My first impulse when I find a new plant is not necessarily to snort it.
But isn't that the place of the pharmacological daredevil? I mean, there's always this one person who's out there, dude, check what I found.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that curiosity, that need to explore things.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Somebody stumbled on this, and I think the same was true of ayahuasca, because in fact, DMT is not that uncommon. Truth to tell, beta-carbolines are not that uncommon. So sooner or later, people are going to stumble on this combination, once they did, then, you know, they share the knowledge.
It just took time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it takes time.
Well, do you think it is possible, I mean, obviously it's possible, but is there any evidence that points to the idea that primitive primates maybe didn't have this monoamine oxidase in their system? And that, or if they did, they had it in lower amounts and allowed more dimethyltryptamine to enter into the body from consuming plants? Like, is there a potential link between consuming various plants? Like, we're talking about thousands of different, like, you could eat a salad. If you didn't have monoamine oxidase in your gut, you could eat a salad and potentially trip.
Yes, if you didn't have it. That's right. That's right.
And when you see jaguars that do trip, like there's all this footage of jaguars in the jungle eating these plants.
Mm-hmm.
What are they doing?
Well,
Do we know, or is it?
we don't know, and I'm not sure how much credence I put into that footage, but
Could be like catnip. Like maybe.
it looks like catnip,
Right.
you know. But they're eating Banisteriopsis apparently, which doesn't have DMT. It's got the beta carbolines.
Right. But the
But in
harmine alone contains some psychoactive compounds.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And there are
Right.
3 main beta carbolines in Banisteriopsis. In fact, this is what I'm talking about at the conference. My talk is about beta carbolines. A lot of activity, the idea that they're not psychoactive, that they're just MAO inhibitors, is not really true. It's an incomplete picture. There are a lot of other activities with beta carbolines, and a lot of attention recently refocused on harmine, which is the main beta carboline in Banisteriopsis. Turns out it has all kinds of activities that have been sort of overlooked until now. Not least of all, it stimulates neurogenesis. It stimulates nerve cell growth. This is big news because
That's huge.
yeah, and potentially it inhibits a kinase, which has to do with kinase is a protein that phosphorylates things, right? Very common, all kinds of kinases around the body, but it inhibits this one particular kinase called DYRK1, whatever that means. But it is associated with the stimulation of nerve growth from neural stem cells. This is all Petri plate test tube stuff, but it's not unreasonable to think that this is going on in the body.
So if that plays a part in neurogenesis, that could potentially have some real benefits to people that have things like Parkinson's or nerve disorders or
Exactly.
maybe PTSD or CTE rather.
Mm-hmm. It could, or you know, especially dementias like
Right.
cognitive
Alzheimer's.
or other types of dementia that are not strictly Alzheimer's, that are just kind of senile dementias. Well, I hope it's true, because
That's going to kick you right back in.
This is my main prophylactic against senility. I figure if I take ayahuasca regularly, I'm probably gonna be okay.
Yeah, right back in the game. Imagine if that's the case. One of the talks that I listened to of your brothers from way back in the day, he was talking about scientific nomenclature related to harmine, and that before they, when one of the early explorers to South America, when they found this stuff, they were calling it telepathine.
Yes, they were calling it telepathine.
Because it induced these group states of telepathy.
Because it was rumored induced.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to get into the you know, what you could call the sordid history of the chemistry investigations of ayahuasca, because harmine and harmaline and tetrahydroharmine, these were originally found in Paganum harmala, which is where they got their names, which is Syrian rue, right? And a lot of people use that as an alternative MAO when they're making ayahuasca analogs. So that's how those alkaloids got their names. And then when chemists came along, kind of all through the 19th century, they started looking at Banisteriopsis, and they would isolate things, and they didn't know what to call them. Sometimes they called them telepathine because of the rumors. Sometimes they were called banisterine and yahaine, and because they didn't really know what the compound was, right? And then it turned out, well, it's actually harmine, and harmine was isolated earlier, so then they got their nomenclature right. There was a long period where they never collected voucher specimens, so a lot of this work was in some ways useless because they forgot to collect the actual plants that they did the isolation from. It got a little more rigorous. There was a couple of investigators that actually thought to collect the plants that they did the isolation with, so then they could document the source, right? I mean, people think this is not important, but in ethnopharmacology it's quite important, you know. For example, for a long time, just a side thing, you know, for a long time there was a plant called Prestonia amazonica. That was reputed to be one of the sources of these alkaloids and one of the components used to make ayahuasca. That got loose in the literature, and it took years to straighten this out because it's not true, and there was no doubt, there was no voucher specimen to show that this was, you know, it was not Prestonia amazonica. It got so bad that Schultes actually had to publish a paper that said Prestonia amazonica, Amazonian hallucinogen or not. Turns out not, you know. So
wow.
You have to beware of bad documentation. If you're going to collect plants, know what you're collecting, so the chemists that might come along and work with that can refer back to it. You know, otherwise, it's just good science, and chemists don't think in terms of the botany. They just have something. They're trying to isolate something from it, but you got to be. It helps to know what the identity of it is. You know, so.
It seems to me that that part of the world, the Amazon jungle, and our really troubling relationship with it currently, it's so analogous to the way human beings are kind of interfacing with the world. Like, that's a good way to look at it there, because there's so many different powerful things that they're learning about this one area while people are chopping it down left and right, slashing and burning and making room for cattle grazing and all this other crazy shit that's going on down there, while, you know, there's so much to be learned still.
Well, yeah, and there is, and this is a good illustration of, you know, our sort of penny wiseness and pound foolishness about these things. There are literally trillions of dollars, if you just want to look at it in terms of dollars and cents, which is not the best way to look at it, because after all, this ecosystem is, you know, the burning of the rainforest is about 30% of human global greenhouse gas emissions. If you could just stop burning down the damn forest. Yeah.
30%?
30%, they figure.
Wow.
But then on the other side of economics, and there have been assessments what use do you make of the Amazonian biome to maximize its value, right? If you do cattle, it's worth so much per hectare. If you do
hardwoods,
well, yeah,
that's the big issue, right?
That's the big issue. But the thing is, in terms of potentially undiscovered blockbuster drugs, there's probably at least $1 trillion worth of undiscovered drugs in the Amazon, which will of course never be discovered because we're going to wreck it. You know,
and there's
we're already busy wrecking it.
Insane amounts of species of plants.
But in the Amazon is 80,000 species. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, there's about 250,000 species of plants overall. Always revising this number, and they always seem to revise it up. But between 250 to 300,000 species of so-called higher plants. And in the Amazon, it's one of the most biodiverse regions, about 80,000 species.
Wow.
So, and all of this, less than 10% of this, not even close to 10% of this incredible molecular and biological diversity has been looked at as potential sources of new medicines. You know, I mean, there's a whole area of folk medicine and folk knowledge, but to systematically look through these species and isolate things of interest hasn't been done. You know, I mean, it's been going on for years. There's been a lot of work, but it's not really touching a big proportion of it. Yeah.
God, it's so
And the
frustrating.
pharmaceutical companies are not interested in this, interestingly enough. They want to, they're corporations, and despite, they tell you they're finding new medicines that will cure people and help people. To a certain extent, that's true, but remember, the bottom line is profit. They want to own everything. They don't want to share intellectual property with these savages down there that are the stewards of this knowledge. Why should we let these people have any part of it? So they want to make everything synthetically. They want it all to come out of vats,
Right.
in their laboratories. But it's the totally wrong approach, because the frequency of compounds that make it from discovery to the clinic is very low. When they abandoned natural products about 25 years ago, the frequency of drug discovery, the pharmaceutical discovery pipeline, as they call it, dried up. And it took a long time for the pharmaceutical industry to realize, essentially we threw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to go back to natural products, because that's where you find the molecular diversity, the scaffolds on which we can build these drugs, right? I mean, you think of the complex molecules that you find in nature. That may not be what makes it to the clinic, right? It may be a derivative of that or an analog of that, but it's still the plants that give you the ideas for the structure. If you can follow me, it's not that you're going to grow this rainforest tree in plantations, but you can go and isolate a compound, determine the structure, and then you can probably synthesize an analog. But the idea comes from nature.
And this is part of the problem, in that isolating one individual compound from a plant that might have multiple compounds that work synergistically.
Well, that's another
Yeah.
difference, right. Again, the FDA and just the whole drug discovery process, they like single compounds, magic bullets. They
Right.
like the synthetic compound that is completely defined molecularly, and they don't like all these other related compounds.
Like Marinol, for instance, right? Synthetic THC, which is not nearly as pleasant for people who have cancer or glaucoma or a host of different.
Very good example. Marinol, it does what it does, but the multi-component preparations of cannabis are much more effective. And that's true of almost all herbal medicines.
Now, when they isolate THC, it's one of how many different cannabinoids? There's
I think there's about 400 different kinds of cannabinoids in cannabis.
So when you're getting THC, you're getting
1/400th of it. I mean, there are
1/400th
a lot of
in
other
Marinol.
things in cannabis as
Right.
well, but I remember reading there were about 400 kinds of cannabinoids in cannabis. So, good example, incredibly complex plant chemically, and as they all are, but that's a good example.
I've never taken Marinol, but everyone that I know that has said it's just a pale imitation of what cannabis gives you.
Yeah, well, it's for one particular use, which is what? I guess it's pain, right?
Yeah.
Is that what it's used for?
But even then, the people that take it for that have said that it's not nearly as effective. It's just
This is a good example of the sort of cognitive dissonance of the FDA and the whole regulatory thing, because for years the FDA has been saying, well, cannabis has no medical use, there's no recognized medical use. Oh, but there is this one drug that the FDA has approved, Marinol, which has some small amount of the therapeutic use that cannabis does.
This is so incredible, with so much information available today, that they're making such poor choices in that regard, that someone can't step up and logically address this thing and say, look, you're getting a fraction of the benefits of this just because of this bizarre need that human beings have to patent things and to own things.
Right. And it's not that plants can't be patented. They can be, formulations can. I think GW Pharmaceuticals, which has brought out Sativex, it's a standardized cannabis preparation that you take orally as a mouth spray. So it's a natural product, it's patented, it has all the cannabinoids are well characterized, it's essentially a standardized extract. So that sort of represents where this is going.
Well, that's a
with respect to
positive. That's a
cannabis.
positive branch of it, right? And
Yeah,
so this,
that's a good thing. That more reflects what cannabis should be as a medicine.
and so it's essentially all the properties of cannabis, and what they've patented is the formulation. Is that what it is?
They've patented the formulation, yeah, and probably the use as well. That's another way you can get patents. on
How is that formulation
natural
unique? Do
process.
you know?
That I couldn't tell you. It's just it's an oral aerosol spray, so there's issues that come up with. Is that it?
That's a company called Jumbo makes a spray.
Okay.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's similar. It's similar to that. It's yeah, it's an oral aerosol, and
My only
I'm sure
concern-
it's well standardized in terms of what cannabinoids are in there. I think they brought it out initially for multiple sclerosis. That was the treatment, and then for seizures, and they're gradually expanding. You know, I mean, it's interesting how marijuana has gone from, you know, this sort of reviled drug of abuse to now it's the medicine of the future. You know?
Right.
And that's a good thing. I mean, I think it does have a lot of applications, and why it should be illegal. There's no reason for this, you know. But obviously there is. It's in someone's interest to keep it illegal.
Well, that would be my only concern with this patented formula that they've sort of figured out, is that other people can't make a formula as well. It's like, in patenting, do they own the process? Like, what if it's a very obvious process? Like, you know, like the ayahuasca process. Like,
Right.
It's a very obvious process. The monoamine oxidase inhibitor, along with the plant that contains DMT, boil it down. Everybody knows how to do it. If somebody figures out a way how to patent that, does that become a real problem in that they own the rights to
Well,
something that's been around forever?
It does become a problem, and with, as you say, with something like that, where, you know, it's pretty obvious how you do it. It's
Right.
not that complicated. There's no innovative technology there. There's no art, right?
Right.
There's no art of innovation, which is what would make it patentable. There were attempts to patent ayahuasca a few years ago,